In this video, we're going to talk about population and sample. And this is referring to conducting surveys and collecting data. So a population is an entire group of people, and a sample is a part of the population. So let's say that Stephen wanted to determine the favorite ice cream flavor at BMS. Now the population would be all of the students there, so roughly about 1,000 students. Now this is probably too many for Stephen to try to survey every student there, so instead he would survey a sample of the students, would be a smaller group that represents that population. Now it's important that Stephen conduct a sample that is what we call unbiased, which means that it doesn't favor any particular part or group more than another. Now, two very important things to remember when surveying a sample of a population is that, number one, we want to make sure that the sample is randomly chosen. So this is giving every student a chance to participate. It would not be unbiased if Stephen only surveyed students in his art class or only surveyed 8th graders, because that is not representative of the entire school, which consists of 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. So he wants to randomly choose his sample, and he also wants to make sure that it's not too small. It's not a good idea for Stephen to survey 2 students and determine that 50% of the school prefers vanilla ice cream. You've seen these types of surveys conducted. For example, Pepsi will tell you that 85% of Americans prefer Pepsi. However, they didn't survey the entire population or every American. What they've done is they've surveyed a sample and then have used that sample to make a prediction. But it's important to include that when they're conducting their sample, they have to make sure that it's representative of the population. So they're not able to just only survey New Yorkers and then say that 85% of Americans prefer Pepsi. They'd have to make sure that their sample included people from each state, people that live in different types of communities, so that it's not favoring one part of this population or one group more than another. So an unbiased sample is one that is representative of the population. It's a good sample. It's an acceptable sample. And a biased sample, however, is one that is not representative. Okay, this is an unfair sample, and any conclusion that is drawn by a biased sample, it will not be considered valid. In the first example, it says that Nolan wants to estimate the number of students at BMS who want a new football field to be built. He randomly surveys 20 students who attend a Friday night football game. Now, it sounds like his sample is going to be unbiased because he's randomly choosing students at the game. However, because he's surveying students that are already at a football game, we would consider this sample to be biased. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that because they're at a football game that they would be in favor of building a new field. However, it does increase the likelihood of them being in favor of a new field. So because this is not conducted at a neutral site, we would say that Nolan's survey is biased. Okay, it is unfair. In the second example, Keshavi wants to determine the most popular type of music among 7th graders. She surveys all the students in her math class. Now, her sample, although she is surveying 7th graders, is only including students that are in her math class, which means that if you are not in that class, then you are excluded from this survey. So since there are people that do not have the opportunity to participate, we say that this sample is biased. Okay, she's not randomly choosing students throughout the 7th grade. If Christopher wants to determine the favorite Italian ice flavor of the 7th grade, he's going to randomly choose 5 students at the 7th grade assembly. So he is randomly choosing students, and he is choosing students from a seventh grade assembly. So those are good parts of a survey or of a sample. However, he is only surveying 5 students, and this number of students is too small to be a good representation of the entire grade. So again, we say that this sample is biased. It is not an appropriate sample. And in the last example, says Matthew wants to estimate the number of BMS students that watch sports. He randomly surveys 1 out of 10 students entering the building one morning. So he's randomly choosing students. 1 out of every 10 will give him a large enough sample size. And he's doing this by entering students or surveying students that are entering the building. Therefore, everyone has a chance or an equal chance to participate in this survey. So we say that this sample is unbiased, which means that it is a fair sample. Alexa wants to estimate the number of students in a high school who ride the bus. Which sample would be the most appropriate? Meaning that we may not find a perfect sampling method. However, the one that is the best is what we're looking for. So the first option says to survey 4 students in the hallway. Now, when thinking about all of the students in the high school, a sample of only 4 is not going to be enough. To survey all the students in the marching band, now the sample size is definitely increased. However, by only surveying the students in the band, we are excluding all the students that are not. So therefore, that sample would also be biased. To survey 50 seniors at random does also not represent our population because the high school would include students at all grade levels. So that would also not be an appropriate sample. And the last option says to survey 100 students at random during lunch. So this is obviously a large enough sample, and it's giving all of the students an opportunity to participate.